Monarchy. Monarchy is a form of government where a king, queen, emperor, or other royal ruler serves as the head of state. In most monarchies, leadership is inherited through a royal family, though the monarch's power vary depending on the country. Monarchies often provide national tradition, cultural identity, and continuity. Royal ceremonies, symbols, and historic institutions can unite citizens, while constitutional monarchies may offer political stability alongside elected governments. Monarchy emerged thousands of years ago as tribes and early kingdoms chose powerful leaders to govern and defend their people. Over time, royal authority became hereditary, creating dynasties that ruled many of history's greatest civilizations. Supporters believe monarchs provide stability beyond political parties, preserve national traditions, and represent the country. In constitutional monarchies, they can also serve as neutral figures above everyday politics. The central principle of monarchy is hereditary succession, where leadership passes through a royal family. Depending on the system, the monarch may hold absolute authority or mainly perform ceremonial and constitutional duties. Absolute monarchies may concentrate too much power in one person, while maintaining royal families can also be expensive. Modern constitutional monarchies include the United Kingdom, Japan, and Sweden. Saudi Arabia and Brunei are examples of absolute monarchies where rulers hold greater executive power. Monarchy remains one of the world's oldest forms of governance, evolving from absolute rule into diverse systems that still shape nations today. Democracy. Democracy is a form of government in which power ultimately belongs to the people. Citizens usually choose their leaders through free and fair elections, allowing the public to influence how the country is governed and hold officials accountable. Most democratic nations have elected representatives, independent courts, and laws designed to ensure equal treatment under the law. The idea of democracy began in ancient Athens around the 5th century BCE, where eligible citizens voted directly on important issues. Over time, democratic ideas spread across the world, evolving into representative systems where people elect leaders to make decisions on their behalf. Supporters believe democracy gives citizens a voice in government and helps prevent the abuse of power. They argue that regular elections, public debate, and accountability encourage governments to respond to the needs and interests of the people. The core principles of democracy include popular sovereignty, political equality, the rule of law, free and fair elections, and the protection of human rights. These principles aim to ensure that government operates with the consent of the governed. Critics argue that democracy can be slow, inefficient, and vulnerable to political division. Elections may encourage short-term decision-making, while misinformation, corruption, or low voter participation can weaken the democratic process. Examples of democratic countries include India, Canada, Germany, Australia, and Italy. While their systems differ, each allows citizens to participate in choosing their government through elections. Democracy remains one of the world's most widely adopted forms of governance, continually evolving as societies strive to balance freedom, representation, and effective leadership. Capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which individuals and businesses own property and the means of production rather than the government. Goods and services are produced and sold in competitive markets, with prices largely determined by supply and demand. Capitalism is known for private ownership, free markets, entrepreneurship, and competition. Businesses compete to attract customers, encouraging innovation, improving products, and creating opportunities for economic growth and investment. Capitalism developed gradually in Europe between the 16th and 18th centuries as trade expanded and merchants gained influence. The Industrial Revolution accelerated its growth, while economists such as Adam Smith promoted the idea that free markets could generate prosperity. Supporters believe capitalism rewards hard work, innovation, and risk-taking. They argue that competition leads to better products, lower prices, greater consumer choice, and stronger economic growth, giving individuals the freedom to start businesses and build wealth. The core principles of capitalism include private property, voluntary exchange, free enterprise, competition, and limited government intervention in the economy. These principles encourage individuals and businesses to make economic decisions based on market conditions. Critics argue that capitalism can lead to income inequality, worker exploitation, and environmental damage if left unchecked. Large corporations may gain excessive influence, and essential services can become difficult to afford for lower-income groups. Examples of capitalist economies include the United States, Singapore, and Switzerland. Most modern countries, however, operate mixed economies that combine capitalist markets with varying levels of government regulation. Capitalism remains the world's dominant economic system, driving innovation and global trade while continuing to spark debate over fairness, equality, and the role of government in the economy. Communism. Communism is a political and economic system in which property, industries, and resources are collectively owned rather than privately controlled. Its goal is to create a classless society where wealth is shared according to people's needs, instead of individual profit. Communism is commonly associated with state ownership, central economic planning, equal distribution of resources, and the aim of reducing social and economic inequality. In practice, many communist states have also featured a single ruling political party. The idea of communism was developed in the 19th century by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who argued that capitalism would eventually be replaced by a classless society. The first major communist government emerged after the Russian Revolution of 1917, inspiring similar movements around the world. Supporters believe communism can reduce inequality by ensuring everyone has access to essential services such as healthcare, education, and housing. They argue that collective ownership prevents the concentration of wealth and prioritizes the needs of society over private profit. The core principles of communism include collective ownership, economic equality, the abolition of social classes, and production based on human need rather than profit. In theory, the ultimate goal is a stateless, classless society, where resources are shared fairly. Critics argue that communist systems often reduce individual freedoms, discourage innovation, and concentrate political power in the hands of the state. Central planning can also lead to economic inefficiency, shortages, and limited consumer choice. Examples of communist or communist-led countries include China, Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, and North Korea, although several have introduced significant market-based economic reforms while retaining communist political leadership. Communism remains one of the most influential and debated political ideologies in history, inspiring both admiration for its ideals of equality and criticism for its implementation in practice. Fascism. Fascism is an authoritarian political ideology that places the nation or race above the individual and seeks a strong central government led by a powerful leader. It rejects liberal democracy and often limits political opposition, civil liberties, and independent institutions. Fascism is commonly associated with extreme nationalism, strict social order, militarism, and loyalty to a single leader. Fascist governments often use propaganda, censorship, and mass rallies to promote unity and strengthen support for the state. Fascism emerged in the early 20th century following the social and economic turmoil of the First World War. It was first established in Italy under Benito Mussolini in 1922 and later influenced similar movements, most notably Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler, although Nazism was a distinct ideology with its own emphasis on racial supremacy. Supporters have argued that fascism can provide strong leadership, national unity, and decisive action during times of crisis. They believe a powerful central authority can restore order, strengthen the nation, and overcome political instability. The core principles of fascism include authoritarian leadership, extreme nationalism, loyalty to the state, militarism, and the subordination of individual interests to national goals. It generally rejects political pluralism and encourages obedience to the ruling authority. Critics argue that fascism suppresses freedom of speech, political opposition, and human rights. Historically, fascist governments have relied on censorship, violence, and persecution, and have been responsible for aggressive wars and widespread atrocities. Historical examples of fascist governments include Mussolini's Italy and Nazi Germany. Other authoritarian regimes have sometimes adopted fascist characteristics, though historians debate whether they should be classified as fully fascist. Fascism is widely condemned today because of its association with dictatorship, oppression, war, and crimes against humanity, making it one of history's most controversial political ideologies. Theocracy. Theocracy is a form of government in which religious leaders govern the state, or political authority is believed to come directly from a deity. Laws and public policies are based primarily on religious teachings, and religion plays a central role in government. Theocracy is commonly associated with religious law, spiritual leadership, and the belief that governing according to divine principles creates a moral and orderly society. Religious institutions often have significant influence over legislation, education, and public life. Theocracy has existed since ancient times, when rulers often claimed divine authority to govern their people. Over the centuries, some societies placed religious leaders directly in power, while others developed governments where religious law became the foundation of the legal system. Supporters believe theocracy promotes moral values, social stability, and ethical leadership by grounding laws in religious teachings. They argue that a government guided by faith can encourage justice, strengthen communities, and provide a clear moral framework for society. The core principles of theocracy include governance based on religious doctrine, the belief that political authority comes from a higher power, and the integration of religion with the legal and political system. Religious leaders or institutions often play a central role in decision-making. Critics argue that theocracy can limit religious freedom, restrict individual rights, and exclude those who follow different beliefs or no religion. Concentrating both religious and political power may also reduce accountability and discourage political diversity. Examples of theocratic governments include Iran and Vatican City, although they operate in very different ways. Historically, many societies have also combined religious authority with political rule to varying degrees. Theocracy remains one of the world's oldest forms of governance, continuing to shape certain nations while raising ongoing debates about the relationship between religion, law, and political power. Anarchy. Anarchy is a political philosophy that advocates for a society without a central government or coercive authority. Instead of being ruled by the state, people organize themselves through voluntary cooperation, mutual agreements, and local communities. Anarchy is commonly associated with individual freedom, voluntary cooperation, decentralized decision-making, and opposition to authoritarian rule. Supporters often believe that communities can solve problems collectively without relying on a central government. The idea of anarchy developed during the 19th century through thinkers such as Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Mikhail Bakunin, and Peter Kropotkin. They argued that governments often create inequality and oppression, proposing voluntary cooperation as an alternative to state control. Supporters believe anarchy encourages personal liberty, equality, and mutual aid. They argue that without a central authority, people can form cooperative communities, make decisions democratically at the local level, and reduce the concentration of political power. The core principles of anarchy include voluntary association, individual freedom, mutual aid, decentralization, and opposition to coercive authority. Rather than relying on a central government, anarchist philosophy promotes cooperation and self-governance within communities. Critics argue that anarchy could lead to instability, weak law enforcement, and difficulties coordinating large societies. Without a central authority, resolving conflicts, maintaining public services, and protecting people from crime or external threats may become more challenging. Examples of long-term anarchist societies are rare, although anarchist principles have influenced communities during the Spanish Civil War and continue to inspire small autonomous movements and cooperative organizations around the world. Anarchy remains one of the most debated political philosophies, admired by supporters for its emphasis on freedom and cooperation, while criticized by others for the practical challenges of governing without a state. Totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which the state seeks to control nearly every aspect of public and private life. A single leader or ruling party typically holds absolute power, with little or no political opposition, independent media, or personal freedoms. Totalitarianism is commonly associated with one-party rule, strict censorship, extensive surveillance, propaganda, and state control over the economy, education, and public opinion. Governments often demand complete loyalty from citizens and suppress dissent through force. The concept of totalitarianism emerged in the 20th century, particularly after the rise of highly authoritarian regimes following the First World War. Advances in mass communication, propaganda, and state institutions allowed governments to exert unprecedented control over society and individual lives. Supporters have argued that totalitarian governments can provide strong leadership, national unity, and rapid decision-making during periods of crisis. They believe centralized authority allows the state to pursue long-term goals without political gridlock or opposition. The core principles of totalitarianism include absolute state authority, centralized power, ideological conformity, suppression of dissent, and extensive control over society. Individual rights are generally considered secondary to the interests and objectives of the state. Critics argue that totalitarianism violates fundamental human rights by restricting freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and the press. Such governments often rely on censorship, surveillance, imprisonment, and intimidation, leaving citizens with little opportunity to challenge those in power. Historical examples of totalitarian regimes include Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany, and Kim Il-sung's North Korea. While they differed in ideology, each exercised extensive control over society and political life. Totalitarianism is widely regarded as one of the most oppressive forms of governance, demonstrating how unchecked political power can severely limit freedom, diversity, and individual rights. Enjoyed the video? Hit subscribe, then click one of these videos to watch other fascinating stories. Thanks for watching.